Hearken, sleepy summoner, and allow the breath of the ancient world to wash over you as a lullaby. Sit with me beneath the whispering boughs of an ageless tree, and imagine a time before our days were measured in seasons and years. In that age of first beginnings, the world itself was a cradle, rocking gently on unseen currents of magic. The sky was close and full of stars, and the earth hummed with life. Rivers whispered, mountains murmured, and every creature that roamed the land, swam the sea, or flew through the air sang a song of belonging. This is a tale woven from those songs. It is not a tale of conquest, nor of sudden violence. Rather, it is the slow, reflective story of a people who were born of both flesh and spirit. When you close your eyes and listen, perhaps you will hear the same harmony that filled the first lands long ago. In the beginning, when the world of Runeterra was young, and the veils between the physical and spiritual realms were thin as morning mist, there was a place that would later be called the First Lands. It was an archipelago of tranquil valleys, fertile plains, and primordial forests. These lands were not solely bound by soil and stone, they were infused with currents of wild magic. Imagine invisible rivers of energy flowing beneath the surface, trickling down from high crags like streams, pooling deep within caverns, and eventually spilling out into the world through hidden springs. This natural magic was not an element separate from life. It was life. It spoke in the rustle of leaves and the ebb and flow of the tides. It glimmered in the dew on the grass and rang in the song of birds at dawn. The First Lands existed at a confluence of worlds. To some, they were a place of pilgrimage where physical and spirit realms overlapped. To others, they were simply home. The people who lived there were ordinary in the sense that they tilled the soil, hunted and gathered. Yet they were extraordinary because they lived in a symbiosis with the raw magic around them. They did not carve the land to suit their needs. Instead, they allowed themselves to be shaped by it. Their villages curved around old trees and clung to the sides of mountains. Their songs were prayers of gratitude and caution, for they knew that the same magic that fed their crops and lit their night skies could also undo them if disrespected. Spirits moved freely in those days. The denizens of the spirit realm were as varied as imagination, playful sprites, serene elementals, wise guardians, and beasts of shifting form. They appeared in dreams and in the corners of eyes, beckoning mortals to consider the invisible forces at play. Among these spirits were beings that did not conform to a single shape. They flowed like water, took on aspects of creatures they admired, and seemed to be part of the land itself. When humans or animals lingered near places where the veil thinned, they might feel a gentle tug on their soul, an invitation to become part of something greater. Those early peoples of the First Lands saw their world as a tapestry. They believed that each creature, each stone, and even each thought was a thread woven by unseen hands. The rivers of magic were the threads that bound the tapestry together, and the spirits were weavers as much as the people. Over generations, myths grew around the intersections of these threads, places where the physical and spiritual mingled so profoundly that new life could arise. These myths whispered of shapeshifters who could dance between realms, of creatures that were neither solely of the flesh nor entirely of the spirit. They told of the Vastayashai'rei before the name existed, hinting at the promise of a people who would embody balance. Before the Great War, Before the Titans fell from the heavens, before the long sorrow that would divide the ancient ones, there was simple harmony. Children learned the patterns of stars and the voices of rivers. Elders taught stories around fires that burned with blue flame, flames that danced without heat and seemed to listen as much as they were listened to. Seasons turned, not by the marching of time, but by the changing of moods in the land. Winter came when the earth desired rest. Spring returned when the world longed for growth. When storms rolled in from the sea, people bowed their heads and offered song, for storms were not just weather, they were beings with thoughts and intentions. In every aspect of life, humans understood that they were part of something vast, mysterious, and beautiful. During this early epoch, the concept of borders was unknown. The first lands were not property to be divided. They were living circles, nested within larger circles. And at the heart of those circles, there pulsed a force that would later be known as wild magic. This force was neither benevolent nor cruel. It responded to intention, to harmony, and to disharmony. It guided seeds to sprout and whispered to the dreams of unborn children. It was also unpredictable, for the spirit realm flowed through it like tides. Where currents of wild magic converged, reality could be different. Time might slow, animals might speak, or people might find themselves glimpsing echoes of other lives and possible futures. These phenomena were not supernatural to those who lived there. They were simply part of the natural order. To stand in that ancient world and draw a breath was to taste magic. The first inhale of a newborn child contained hints of starlight and the memory of mountains. The last exhale of an elder returned stories to the land, stories that would be reborn in the songs of birds or the whisper of leaves. That is how the first lands held knowledge, not on parchment, but within living cycles. If one listened closely, one could hear the wisdom of ancestors in the call of a crane or the crackle of a fire. One might hear a promise that balance could be maintained if all beings respected the flow. It was a fragile balance, sustained by reverence and by the quiet strength of those who kept watch between worlds. Harmony, however, is rarely a permanent state. Somewhere beyond the skies of the first lands, forces stirred. In stories told by grandmothers and shaman, the Titans were not demonic in the way later ages would describe devils. They were vast beings of stone and star, born perhaps of some other cosmic realm whose purpose was unknown. They descended not as raindrops, but as mountains falling, shaking the world with their sheer presence. Their forms glittered with the cold light of faraway constellations, and when they spoke, if what they emitted could be called speech, it was a resonance that could make mountains tremble. The people of the first lands looked up and saw wonder that quickly turned to dread. The Titans did not understand the gentle balance. They carved paths through forests and diverted rivers as if these were meaningless. They stepped upon sacred groves without hearing the pleas of spirits. Some say the Titans were searching for something, perhaps a home, perhaps a resource, but their search brought ruin. Crops failed beneath their shadows, animals fled or perished. The spirits that once laughed among trees shrank back, wounded and frightened. The first response of the mortals was to avoid and to appease. They offered songs and gifts at the feet of the Titans. They lit bonfires that burned with fragrant herbs, sending up prayers in smoke. When these efforts went unanswered, despair crept into their hearts. Despair is a quiet, heavy thing. It does not arrive with the roar of battle, but settles like frost, numbing hopes and dimming eyes. Yet, within that despair, seeds of courage began to sprout. The people recognized that harmony required action as much as reverence. There were those among them who felt a deeper call than others. Perhaps it was because their souls were already somewhat fluid, shaped by the magic of the land. Perhaps they had always been drawn to the whispering places where realms touched. They gathered in secret glades and on moonlit shores. Elders, hunters, healers, and youths sat in circles with spirits as their company. They shared dreams and visions. In these visions, they were shown an image, a group of mortals stepping across an unseen threshold, taking in the essence of the spirit realm and becoming something new. To become something new meant letting go of certain things. They would no longer be fully mortal, and they would never be fully spirit either. They would walk between worlds. They would carry magic not as a tool, but as an extension of their being. It was a path filled with risk, for nothing like this had been attempted. But when the Titans cracked another mountain and drained another river, the council made their choice. In a ceremony whispered of but rarely spoken aloud, a small group of mortals opened themselves to the spirit realm. They did not harness magic as one might harness a beast. They let it flow into them, around them, through them. They allowed animal spirits, plant spirits, and elements to merge with their flesh. Their bones became lighter yet stronger, their senses sharpened, their souls stretched. Some found their limbs lengthening and covered in fur or feathers. Others felt scales upon their skin or saw their eyes shine with uncanny light. They became the Vastayashai'rei, a name that would later be translated simply as those who bridge the realms. Transformed, the Vastayashai'rei did not stand alone. They moved in concert with spirits and mortals alike. They reached out to the rivers of wild magic and sang them into torrents, raising waves that slowed the Titan's steps. They whispered to trees and stones, asking them to bend and twist, to form barricades and labyrinths that would confound giant feet. They leapt upon the backs of Titans and drew upon the strength of beasts, scratching at hard surfaces until hairline fractures became fissures. When a Titan turned its gaze upon a Vastayashai'rei, it saw not a frail mortal, but a shifting form of light and claw and leaf, something it could not categorize or crush easily. The war that followed was not one of blood and fire, though there was blood and fire. It was a war of endurance and will. The Titans did not comprehend the patience of the land, and the Vastayashai'rei did not seek total annihilation. They sought to drive the Titans away, to remind them that this world was not a vacant stage. Day after day, year after year, they danced along cliffs and across fields, weaving magic and singing songs of resilience. Mortals, too, fought in their own ways. They learned to trust that the unseen could be a shield. They carried water to heal spirits of streams, mended wounded roots, and maintained the sanctity of sacred places so that the Vastayashai'rei could draw upon them. Over time, the Titans slowed. Maybe they grew weary of the constant resistance. Maybe they found what they were searching for elsewhere. Stories tell of a final confrontation in a valley where stars had reflected in a lake since the dawn of creation. There, the Vastayashai'rei and their mortal kin sang as one. Their voices rose, joined by the whispers of spirits, until the song became a force. It swelled and filled the valley, pressing upon the Titans like waves. The Titans, hearing perhaps for the first time the hearts of the world they had been trampling, turned their great bodies and walked away. They climbed back into the heavens, or perhaps stepped into another plane. Victory came not with cheers but with exhaustion. The Vastayashai'rei were hailed as heroes, but they did not see themselves as rulers. They refused crowns and temples. They chose to return to their villages, to live as part of the tapestry they had defended. They understood that balance is not maintained through dominance. They were content to be guardians and guides, to share wisdom when asked, and to listen when the land spoke. They walked among mortals, not above them, teaching that everyone held a piece of magic within themselves. This epoch, however, could not remain static. Just as rivers change course and mountains erode over centuries, the nature of the Vastayashai'rei began to shift. They were neither wholly mortal nor wholly spirit, and in that liminal existence lay both strength and fragility. The merging of realms within them was intense. For generations, they remained ageless, able to take on many forms, to heal wounds that would kill others, and to speak with spirits as easily as with people. Yet they also felt the pull of the spirit realm more keenly with each passing century. Some found themselves wandering deeper into the spirit world, losing interest in the affairs of flesh. Others fell in love with mortals and discovered that union created children who were not quite Vastayashai'rei, but not fully mortal either. And thus, without any decree or sudden tragedy, the Vastayashai'rei began to diverge. The division of the Vastayashai'rei was not an abrupt sunder like a branch torn from a tree. It was more like a river splitting into tributaries. As generations passed and the memory of the Titan War became a tale told to children, the ancient shapeshifters felt different calls. Some were drawn ever further into the spirit realm, where time flowed differently and desire was more fluid. They would appear in villages with eyes glowing like foxfire, offer a blessing or a warning, and vanish back into mist. Others grew fond of mortal life, of planting seeds and watching them grow, of feeling rain on skin, of laughter around a fire. They chose to bind themselves more fully to the physical world, finding partners among humans and even animals, and thereby grounding themselves. Their children were unlike any beings seen before. The early offspring of these unions were called by various names in various dialects, but they shared common traits. They were chimeric, embodying both the physical lineage of their parents and the spiritual essence passed down by the Vastayashai'rei. Some had foxtails and ears, but hands capable of delicate work and minds capable of complex language. Others bore feathers instead of hair, with voices that could mimic birdsong and eyes that saw in the dark. A few took on the lithe bodies of cats or the muscular forms of primates, yet walked upright and thought deeply. Each lineage was a blend, an expression of the harmony between realms. These beings came to be known collectively as the Vastaya. The word itself meant simply the people, but the names of individual lineages honored the ancient heroes of the Titan War. There were those who traced their heritage to Kiilash, the noble warrior who sang to mountains. They called themselves the Kiilash and roamed the deserts and plains, valuing strength, pride, and the thrill of the hunt. There were those who remembered Xayah, the dutiful guardian of rivers, and became known as the Chiran, though their stories have largely faded with the currents of time. Others aligned with Lhotlan, the cunning spirit who wove mist and song, and so the Lhotlan were born, with their colourful plumage and capacity for dance. Dozens of names were whispered into being as the Vastaya spread, names lost to modern tongues, yet resonant in the secret languages of forest and sea. The magic within the Vastaya was different from the boundless well of the Vastayashai'rei. It was inherited, shaped by generations, nurtured by ritual, and bound to place. The Vastaya were mortal. They aged, they bore children, they fell ill, and they died. Yet they were not like other mortals. They could sense currents of wild magic in ways humans could not. They could feel disturbances in the spirit realm and see spirits when they chose. Many could shapeshift, though few could assume as many forms as their ancestors. Some could change only small aspects of themselves, the color of their eyes, the length of their tails, while others could fully mimic the appearance of those around them. Their shoma, or spiritual essence, was strong, and it allowed them to share thoughts, emotions, and memories by proximity alone. In a Vastayan clan, secrets were rare because feelings flowed as freely as conversations. With the rise of the Vastaya came joy and sorrow alike. Joy because the balance between the realms seemed to have found a new expression. The Vastaya brought beauty and innovation. They crafted instruments that echoed the voices of spirits and danced in ways that told stories even without words. They created art from leaves, feathers, sand, and shells, celebrating the diversity of their forms. Yet there was sorrow, because every step toward the mortal world meant a step away from the ancient unity of the Vastayashai'rei. No new Vastayashai'rei were born. The children of those ancient guardians grew old and died. Their parents, feeling the pull of the spirit realm, eventually left. The world entered a time when the old powers slept and the new people had to learn to protect balance themselves. As centuries turned like pages in a book, the Vastaya found themselves scattered. Some settled deep within the forests of Ionia, building homes among the roots of colossal trees. Others took to the open waters, weaving homes in coral reefs and kelp forests off the coast of Bilgewater. A number braved the desert, following ley lines of magic across Jurima to oasis and canyon. A few wandered beyond these, to places where the memory of the Titan War was only a faint myth. Wherever they went, they carried with them an inherent understanding of balance and the responsibility to maintain it. They were not always successful. They disagreed, argued, and sometimes fought. They loved, laughed, and made mistakes. They were, in truth, people. No longer spirits made flesh, but beings with all the complexity that mortals possess. The sorrow of their division lingered. Even as tribes formed and thrived, some Vastaya could feel an emptiness when they gazed at the stars. They sensed that there had once been a link that allowed them to feel the pulse of the world more directly, and that link was fading. They sang songs of longing for the Vastayashai'rei who had departed, songs that mingled melancholy with gratitude. These songs were soft and reflective, carried on the wind to remind those who heard them that nothing remains unchanged, that even magic ebbs and flows, and that the responsibility to care for the world is never passed down entirely. It must be taken up anew by each generation. From the seeds sown in sorrow and hope grew the myriad tribes of the Vastaya. Each tribe was an echo of the ancient past and a promise for the future. Each was shaped by the land they called home and by the ancestor whose name they bore. In the forests of Ionia, where magic hung thick in the air and the spirit realm was but a breath away, several tribes flourished. The Lhotlan were perhaps the most renowned of these, known for their brilliant plumage and their mastery of song and dance. To watch a Lhotlan performance was to witness the very air shimmer. Their wings, for though they walked upright, many bore wings in place of arms, fluttered in intricate patterns that echoed ancient glyphs. Their voices could mimic the calls of birds, the rush of waterfalls, and the whispers of spirits. They inhabited the eastern island of Kaelin, where magic flowed freely. Yet even there they felt the encroachment of mortals, whose settlements pressed inward, damming rivers and cutting trees to build their own homes. The Lhotlan elders debated whether to resist or retreat. Some argued for isolation, for preserving what little land they had left. Others believed in engaging with mortals to find a way to let wild magic run free. This tension between withdrawal and engagement would come to define the tribe in later tales. Within the shadows of Ionia's deep woods lived the Shimon, a tribe of nimble, primate-like Vastaya. They believed that life was an evolutionary climb toward wisdom. A Shimon elder would tell children that upon death their spirits would become stones, and from those stones new life would climb again. They were cautious by nature, taking few risks and listening for signs before taking action. This caution made them stable, but it also chafed those among them who possessed restless hearts. Young Shimon sometimes sought to break away, to carve their own paths, to prove that courage and cleverness could bring about a change. Stories of such youths, mischievous, impulsive, and yet yearning to protect their people, would reverberate in many hearts. Far to the east, on a remote island shrouded in mist, lived the Cat. They claimed lineage from the very first of the Vastaya and maintained rituals that they said dated back to the Vastayashai'rei. Their Shoma was shared openly. Thoughts, emotions, memories, all flowed freely among them. They were peaceful and curious, possessing the ability to take on the shapes of those they encountered. To them, mimicry was a form of empathy. When one Cat adopted the form of another creature, it was not to deceive, but to understand. They played games of hide-and-seek with trinkets and ideas, hiding a thought and inviting others to find it. Their isolation kept them safe for centuries, but it also made them vulnerable to great change when it came. Near those same seas, but beneath the waves, lived the Marai. This tribe was not a single tribe, but a collective of mermaid-like Vastaya who had adapted fully to aquatic life. The Marai told ancient stories of a rift in the depths, a place where a creeping darkness emerged from below. To protect themselves from whatever horrors lurked there, they retrieved from those depths a glowing stone known as a moonstone. This stone, infused with celestial magic, cast a light that kept monsters at bay. Every century, when the moonstone's light dimmed, a warrior known as the Tide Caller would retrieve an abyssal pearl from the rift and exchange it with a landwalker tribe for a new stone. The ritual bound them to the cycles of the sea, to bravery, and to trust in a promise that land and sea would aid one another. In the wide desert expanse of Shurima roamed the Kiilash, whose heritage was tied to Kiilash. They were lion-like, fierce and proud. In a society that honored the hunt above all, Kiilash children learned early to track, to stalk, and to respect their prey. they measured themselves by the trophies they collected, the tusks of beasts, the skulls of sandhawks, and, in darker tales, the heads of foes. The desert taught them harsh lessons. Those who were weak would not survive, and those who were strong would become leaders. Yet, even among the Kiilash, compassion existed. Hunters shared their kills with the old and with children. Elders told stories of Kiilash not just as a warrior, but as a guardian of balance. They reminded youths that the honor of the hunt lay not in cruelty, but in respect for the cycle of life. Throughout Ionia and beyond, there were other lineages and tribes whose names have faded from common memory. There were the Vesani, said to have brought innovation and art to the world before being wiped out in a tragedy that left only scattered descendants. There were the Chiron guardians of rivers, whose songs blended with the currents to form melodies still audible if one listens closely at night. There were tribes that never named themselves, living in small bands along mountain ridges or within swamps, content to exist without record. All were Vastaya, all carried within them the memory of a time when beings walked between realms freely, and all had to navigate the increasingly complex dance between mortals, spirits, and wild magic. As mortals, humans primarily expanded their settlements. The Vastaya found themselves negotiating, resisting, and sometimes yielding. In some places, mortals and Vastaya coexisted peacefully. A farmer might share his harvest with his Vastayan neighbors in exchange for a blessing on his fields. A Vastayan shaman might perform rituals at a human wedding, ensuring that the union honored not only the couple, but also the spirits of the place. In other places, distrust grew. Humans, unfamiliar with the subtle rules of wild magic, built structures that disrupted the flow. They dammed rivers, felled old trees, and mined mountains. The Vastaya saw their sacred sites desecrated. Magic, once abundant, began to dim in places. Words like Kiilash, devices created by humans to suppress natural magic, entered the lexicon, further deepening rifts. Yet, even as relations strained, the tribes continued to thrive in their own ways. They held festivals at the turning of the seasons, inviting spirits to dance with them. They taught their children the songs of the Titan War and of the Vastayashai'rei, ensuring that history was not forgotten. They watched stars and listened to rivers for omens. They stood at the borders of their territories, sometimes with open arms and sometimes with sharpened quills, depending on who approached. Their stories spread, not only among themselves, but also whispered in human villages, in coastal taverns, and along the paths of wandering merchants. Those stories spoke of beauty, courage, sorrow, and resilience. They told of individuals who would one day shape the fate of both Vastaya and mortals alike. In the centuries that followed, wanderers, prophets, shamans, and spirits moved through the tapestry of the first lands and beyond, weaving threads of wisdom and warning. Among the Vastaya, it was common for individuals to take up roles that crossed tribe and territory. A shaman from one clan might travel to another to mediate a dispute or to share knowledge of a healing herb. A prophet might wander the border between the spirit realm and the mortal realm, returning with visions that guided entire communities. These figures were rarely warriors in the physical sense. Instead, they wielded insight. They listened to the murmur of stones and the sigh of wind. They watched how birds flew and how fish swam, finding in those patterns hints of what might come. They meditated beneath waterfalls to attune their shoma to the currents of magic. They were also keen observers of mortals. They knew that people change as swiftly as the weather, and they adjusted their guidance accordingly. Some prophets were celebrated and welcomed wherever they went. Others were seen as unsettling, for truth can be uncomfortable. The spirits themselves remained integral. Not all spirits were grand or powerful. Some were small, the essence of a particular tree or pool. These spirits often bonded with Vastaya or mortals alike, forming partnerships that endured for lifetimes. A fisher might befriend a river spirit who would ensure safe travels in exchange for songs and respect. A village might honor a mountain spirit who watched over their crops, offering baskets of fruit to a stone shrine. Larger spirits, such as those tied to storms or to the changing of seasons, were less personal and more awe-inspiring. When they moved, whole valleys felt the shift. Shamans would gather to interpret their movements and counsel their communities on how to respond. There were tales of wanderers who bridged not only tribe but species. A half-remembered story tells of a Vastayan hermit who sat on a mountain pass playing a reed flute. He played for the spirits of the wind and for the humans who passed by. Those who listened said they felt their burdens lighten. Another story speaks of a woman who, though mortal, had such a strong shoma that she could see spirits plainly. She traveled with a fox spirit, teaching Vastaya and humans alike how to heal wounds of the soul. Such individuals reminded all that the boundaries between the peoples were porous if one approached with respect and humility. Prophets sometimes foresaw great changes. They saw the creeping shadows that would be cast by foreign empires, the burning of once sacred groves, the building of strange machines that would drain magic from the land. They cautioned that the Vastaya would need to adapt. Some urged preparation through diplomacy. Others quietly guided their tribes to more remote places. A few advocated resistance, warning that if the wild magic were damned, all would suffer. In many cases, their warnings were heeded too late, but their stories endured, serving as lanterns for those who came after. It is said that spirits, too, mourned when the great changes began. They retreated deeper into their realms, emerging less often. Fewer humans saw flickers at the edge of vision. Children, once born with natural sensitivity to spirits, grew to think of such tales as bedtime fancies. The wanderers and shamans among the Vastaya became even more important during this time, for they remembered how to listen. They kept the memory of dialogue alive. They reminded their people that even if the spirit realm felt distant, it was still there, and neglecting it would have consequences. Through them, traditions persisted. The making of offerings, the telling of stories, the honoring of dreams. Through them, the fragile threads between worlds remained intact, awaiting the day when they might once again be woven tightly. The relationship between mortals and the Vastaya was a dance whose steps shifted with time. In the earliest days, contact was sporadic and marked by curiosity. Humans would glimpse eyes gleaming in the underbrush, or hear laughter like that of children when no one was present. In coastal waters, fishermen would see shapes in the waves that were not fish and not shadow. When a Vastayan and a mortal met, there was often an initial moment of wonder. The Vastayan might be intrigued by the mortal's simple steadfastness, by their resilience in the absence of shape-shifting and magic. The mortal might be drawn to the Vastayan's graceful movements and the sense of otherworldliness that surrounded them. Over time, these meetings became more frequent. Trade developed. Vastaya, who possessed knowledge of herbs not found in human settlements, would barter their remedies for crafted tools. Human farmers would exchange bundles of wheat for blessings on their fields. In some regions, marriages occurred between Vastaya and humans. These unions were often celebrated with elaborate ceremonies that honored both lineages. They were not simply personal unions, but symbolic bonds between peoples. Children born of such marriages were sometimes called half-kin. They carried traits of both parents and were seen as bridges between worlds. Yet, not all encounters were harmonious. As human populations grew, so did their need for land and resources. Wood was cut from forests that Vastaya considered sacred. Rivers were diverted to irrigate fields, leaving downstream regions dry and causing spirit guardians to fade. There were misunderstandings. A human might build a home on a site where spirits danced at night, inviting misfortune. A Vastayan might take livestock from a human farm, seeing it as part of the natural cycle, not understanding the mortal concept of ownership. These clashes sometimes escalated into skirmishes. Words turned into shouts, and shouts turned into thrown stones or drawn weapons. Blood was shed, and with blood came the stain of mistrust. In some places, humans and Vastaya found ways to coexist. Councils were formed where elders of both peoples would speak of their needs and find compromises. Mortals learned rituals of apology, leaving offerings when they had to take more than usual from the land. Vastaya assigned envoys to attend human festivals, to teach songs that honored the spirits. In other places, fear and greed drove them apart. Humans built fortified towns and refused entry to any who looked different. Vastaya retreated into the deep wilds, erecting wards and weaving spells that hid their enclaves. Tales of betrayal circulated on both sides. A human hunter killing a Vastayan guardian for its rare feathers. A Vastayan group luring travelers astray. These tales hardened hearts and made future meetings fraught. The greatest strain came when foreign empires turned their eyes toward the First Lands. Noxian troops marched into Ionia, bringing with them iron, fire, and ambitions of conquest. To them, the Vastaya were curiosities or obstacles. They sought to harness the wild magic, not for harmony, but for war. Vastayan villages were burned. Sacred sites were trampled. In response, some Vastaya fought alongside Ionian humans, defending their homeland. Others retreated further, choosing survival over direct confrontation. There were those who, seeing the tide of human power, attempted to negotiate with the invaders, hoping to preserve something of their way of life. Throughout these shifting relations, individuals played pivotal roles. A single act of kindness could heal a rift. A single betrayal could deepen it. A wandering musician might share a song that taught empathy, opening ears and hearts. A cruel soldier might take a life, sowing seeds of generational enmity. The dance between mortals and Vastaya was thus not choreographed by some distant fate, but improvised by countless hands and feet. It was a dance that continues, changing with each choice made by those who step into the space between trust and fear. Among the Vastaya, whose lives bridged myth and the present, none embodied both grace and yearning, quite like Ahri. Born of a tribe whose name had been nearly lost to time, the Vesani, she entered the world with twin gemstones by her side. These sunstones glowed with a warmth that seemed to echo with whispers of her ancestors. Yet, for most of her life, the history of her people was obscured. She remembered little of her parents beyond the feel of their fur and the lullabies they hummed. She grew up in the northern reaches of Shonzan, among packs of ice foxes whose coats blended with snow. Though she was not one of them, the foxes recognized a kinship in her golden eyes and agile form. They accepted her into their hunts and their dens, sharing with her a life that was wild and rhythmic. In that existence, Ahri discovered that she could attune to the magic of the world around her. She felt the pulse of the earth through her pores and the presence of spirits in the chill of the wind. When her packmates stalked prey, Ahri would let her senses stretch. Sometimes she could feel the heartbeat of a deer through the ground. Sometimes she could sense the fear of a hare before it darted. She learned to channel this awareness, quickening her reflexes, sharpening her focus. On cold nights, when hunger gnawed at all their bellies, she would nuzzle a frightened fawn, soothing it so that it stood serene even as jaws closed in. The life of a predator was harsh, but Ahri tried to find a gentleness in it. The world of mortals, humans, was distant. From afar, Ahri saw them moving in groups, carrying tools, speaking in voices loud and rough. There was curiosity and caution in her heart. One winter, she watched a band of huntsmen camp near her forest. Their fire crackled and sent sparks up into the night like tiny stars. One of them was struck by an arrow, perhaps from a rival or a hunter defending their territory. As his life ebbed, Ahri felt the essence leaving his body, a warm glow dissipating into the cold air. Driven by instinct, she did not fully understand. She crept close and tasted that essence. A flood of memories not her own washed over her, memories of battles fought, of a lover's smile, of children waiting at home. In those moments, Ahri discovered that she could not only sense but absorb the life essence of others. When she guided his feelings from fear to peace with a touch of her paw and a gentle hum, she felt him relax. He saw not his dying body, but a sunlit meadow. When he passed, his last sigh carried gratitude. That encounter awakened a hunger within Ahri. In the days that followed, she found that human words came to her easily, as if she had always known them. She began to venture toward human settlements, her 9 tails concealed beneath a cloak of fur, her ears hidden beneath a hood. She listened to conversations in markets and learned to mimic speech. She discovered emotions more complex than the ice foxes had ever shown. Curiosity, jealousy, ambition. These were intoxicating flavors. She learned that by drawing out the essence of a person, she could feel what they felt, taste their aspirations and regrets, and quell her own hunger. At first, Ahri convinced herself that she did no harm. She would charm a traveler into sharing a story, draw in a fragment of their essence, and let them go with a smile. But as time passed, her hunger grew, and she found herself taking more. Memories of others lingered in her mind like vivid dreams. Voices whispered in her ears when she rested. She felt intoxicated by the life she consumed. In an abandoned cottage, she encountered a wandering artist whose hands were stained with paint and whose eyes were soft with kindness. He saw her for what she was and did not flee, offering his life in exchange for her heart, not the organ, but her affection. He stayed. For the first time, Ahri surrendered to love. She learned the softness of shared laughter and the warmth of a hand that held hers without fear. Yet her hunger did not abate. In a moment of weakness, she drew deeply on his essence, not realizing until too late that she had taken too much. He collapsed, his memories spilling into her like light. He loved her even as his vision dimmed. She grieved, her cries echoing through the forest. Tormented by guilt, Ahri withdrew from the world of mortals. She wandered alone, clinging to her sunstones, feeling the weight of lives she had consumed. In quiet moments, she heard whispers in the gems, soft voices of her ancestors urging her to seek her true heritage. She had always known she was Vastaya, but she knew nothing of her tribe. Determined to learn more, she set out across Ionia. Along her journey, she met wise elders, cunning merchants, and other Vastaya who sensed the ancient magic within her. She learned of the Vesani, her lineage, a tribe that had once stood at the forefront of innovation, creating wonders that blended art and magic. The Vesani had vanished, lost to a calamity that had scattered them to the winds. Ahri found no living Vesani, but she found ruins of their temples and scraps of their songs. With each discovery, Ahri felt more grounded. She began to understand that her abilities were not a curse, but a gift that could be used with care. She practiced channeling the life essence she absorbed, learning to release it back into the world. She sought out those in pain and offered them gentle ease. When she fed, she did so on criminals and oppressors, those who inflicted suffering on others. Slowly, stories spread of a nine-tailed fox who walked the forests, sometimes taking what she needed, but always moving on. Ahri's journey did not end with self-discovery. She continued to search for others like her, hoping to rebuild some semblance of the Vesani. Along the way, she formed alliances and friendships. She met humans who challenged her assumptions and Vastaya who offered insights. She encountered spirits who showed her glimpses of possible futures. Each experience added a thread to her identity. She remains a wanderer, carrying with her not only the weight of past mistakes, but the hope of creating new memories, ones not taken from others but forged from her own choices and acts of kindness. She knows now that within her is the capacity for both hunger and healing, and she has chosen the path of healing. Her story continues, a living reminder that redemption is a journey, not a destination. The tale winds on, lingering over memories, emotions, and sensations. Imagine each experience like a pebble dropped into a still pond. The ripples spread outward, touching shores far beyond the initial splash. In the same way, the thoughts and feelings of our protagonist echo through their journey. They look back on the first scent of rain they ever noticed, on the texture of moss beneath bare feet, on the way the stars looked when there was no roof overhead. They recall the warmth of a friend's hand, the comfort of shared laughter, and the sorrow of loss. Each recollection is savored slowly, described with care so that the sleepy summoner might feel it as well. The narrative does not rush, it meanders like a river, exploring side channels, describing the colors of autumn leaves, the sound of distant drums, the taste of ripe fruit. These details, though they may seem small, build a world within the mind, inviting the listener to dwell there. As the protagonist reflects on their choices, they consider not only actions but motivations, wondering if a different path might have been taken. They think about the stories told to them in childhood and how those stories shaped their expectations. They ponder the faces of those they met along the way, people with joys and fears of their own. They meditate on the nature of magic, on how it feels when it flows freely and how it aches when constrained. They whisper gratitude to the spirits that accompanied them, even when those spirits were silent. In these reflective passages, time stretches. The story breathes. It invites stillness and contemplation, allowing the listener to move beyond plot and into the realm of feeling. On the island of Kiilash, amid the whispering forests and winding rivers, young Xayah grew up listening to her father sing songs of ancient heroes. Those songs spoke of Vastayan warriors who had stood against titans, of spirits who had guided and guarded, of a time when magic flowed like water unimpeded. Xayah's eyes sparkled when her father's voice rose in haunting melodies. She closed her eyes and imagined her ancestors soaring over treetops, their wings catching the light, their quills shimmering like stars. She imagined a world where the sky was filled with color and the land hummed with undammed power. These visions took root in her heart. But the reality Xayah saw when she went outside was different. Humans had built villages that crept ever closer to Lhotlan tribal lands. They constructed barriers called quinlons to dam the flow of magic, claiming it was for protection. They felled trees older than any human memory and redirected streams. Representatives from the Lhotlan, the Joliath, met with mortal leaders, negotiating treaties that were repeatedly broken. Each broken promise felt like another feather plucked from the Lhotlan's pride. The tribe's vibrancy dimmed. The songs Xayah loved began to sound like echoes. The elders spoke of retreat and preservation, urging their people to withdraw deeper into the forests and let the world change without them. Xayah could not accept this quiet surrender. Every time she saw humans take more than they needed, she felt a fire ignite within her. She believed that the Vastaya's survival depended on fighting back, on reclaiming the wild magic that humans had damned. She began to act. With quills sharper than knives and a stride as swift as a hawk in flight, she snuck into human encampments. She cut the lines of machines, shattered quinlons, and whispered warnings to those who would listen. Mortals who sought to hinder her found themselves distracted by a flutter of violet feathers and then knocked to the ground by an unseen force. Word of a vigilante spread. She became known as the Violet Raven, a ghost who flitted in and out of fortresses, leaving them in disarray. Many Vastaya quietly admired her, yet few dared to join her. They feared retribution. They believed negotiations might still work. They saw Xayah's path as dangerous not only for her but for all. She took allies when they volunteered and fought alongside other rebels, but her dedication to her cause was such that she often acted alone, believing that her meticulous planning and agility could accomplish what a larger group could not. She focused only on the next mission, the next target. Her life became a series of flights, attacks, and escapes. She had little time for friendships and little desire for them. In the mountain town of Vlonko, during a harvest festival, Xayah sought a stolen artifact. She expected to find humans guarding it, but she did not anticipate encountering Rakan. He was on a stage, surrounded by villagers, both human and Vastaya, who clapped and laughed as he sang. His plumage was resplendent, catching the light and reflecting colors across the crowd. His movements were theatrical, his voice mesmerizing. Where Xayah's songs were sharp and urgent, his were fluid and inviting. When Xayah saw him, she rolled her eyes. Here was a fellow Lhotlan who seemed content to entertain drunk revelers while the magic of their homeland faded. After she completed her mission, easier than she expected due in part to Rakan's distraction of the crowd, he approached her. His smile was open, his feathers still trembling with the energy of his performance. He attempted to flatter her. She tried to ignore him. When he asked after their people, she told him bluntly, the Lhotlan had lost their lands. In that moment, the air around them seemed too still. Rakan's plumage darkened, his expression turning serious. Rage glinted in his eyes. The foppish performer was gone, replaced by someone who cared deeply. Surprised, Xayah saw in him not a fool, but a Vastaya who shared her pain. Rakan begged to join Xayah. He saw in her cause a chance to fight for their people, for someone whose life had been a series of performances, whose value seemed to lie in how well he could entertain. This purpose burned with clarity. Xayah hesitated. She worked alone because she did not trust others to match her dedication, but she recognized that Rakan had talents she lacked. His grand entrances and acrobatics could draw attention and confusion, providing cover for her precise strikes. She agreed on the condition that he carry his weight. As they traveled together, they discovered a partnership that transcended mere convenience. Rakan's boundless energy and charisma balanced Xayah's focus and intensity. In battle, his flamboyant leaps and pirouettes drew eyes and blades, while her quills found their marks. Off the battlefield, he could charm information from reluctant informants, while she could strategize and plan. He saw the good in people, offering forgiveness where Xayah saw only betrayal. She grounded him when his ideas grew impractical. Over time, they fell in love. Their love was not born of softness, but of mutual respect. Xayah saw in Rakan a devotion to the Vastaya that matched hers. Rakan saw in Xayah a strength of will he had never known. They pledged themselves to each other during a tavern brawl, their laughter ringing out even as chairs crashed around them. Together they traveled the First Lands, rallying Vastaya to their cause. They spoke of reclaiming the wild magic, of rebuilding the ancient balance. They fought against Noxian soldiers, destroyed Quinlan's, and freed imprisoned spirits. They faced betrayal and hardship. They argued over methods. Sometimes Rakan's compassion clashed with Xayah's ruthlessness. When Rakan saw a human child trembling behind the skirts of a scared mother, he wanted to leave them be. Xayah would see in that child another potential destroyer of magic. Through their disagreements, they grew. They learned to see with each other's eyes. Rakan learned that sometimes mercy allowed oppressors to rise. Again, Xayah learned that to inspire change, one must show a better way, not just destroy the old. As news of their deeds spread, more Vastaya took heart. The Lhotlan, the Shimon, even some of the Kiilash began to believe that change was possible. Not everyone joined them, but even those who did not often watched with hope. Rakan and Xayah's names became symbols whispered around fires and sung quietly by those afraid of reprisal. Noxian soldiers began to speak of a violet shadow and a charmer whose laughter could turn swords. Xayah and Rakan became more careful, knowing that their visibility was both a weapon and a danger. For Xayah, the dream remained constant. Reclaim the First Lands, restore the flow of wild magic, and see the Vastaya thrive. For Rakan, the dream evolved. He still wanted to see the Vastaya flourish, but he also saw the possibility of a world where mortals and Vastaya could coexist if magic were respected. Their love became a beacon, showing that unity did not require uniformity. Through Xayah, Rakan found purpose. Through Rakan, Xayah found heart. Their journey is far from over. They continue to fight, to inspire, and to dance together, believing that with enough persistence and enough love, the tapestry of the First Lands can be rewoven in harmony. Deep within the magical forests of Ionia lived the tribe known as the Shimon. They were careful people, cautious to a fault. To them, life was a climb toward wisdom. Upon death, they believed they became stones, giving their wisdom back to the earth. Among them, a young Vastayan named Kong grew restless. He was impulsive, clever, and easily bored. His energy did not fit neatly within the quiet rituals of his tribe. Kong loved tricks. He would hide in tree branches and drop leaves on elders as they walked. He would mimic the calls of distant animals, sending his friends on fruitless chases. The elders scolded him, warning that play can be dangerous when the forest is alive with spirits. But Kong's heart beat to a different rhythm. He yearned for adventure. He imagined himself leaping from branch to branch beyond the Shimon's territory, meeting spirits and mortals alike. He felt within him a strength that needed expression, a spark that could not be contained by caution. One day, Kong returned to the village with urgency. He declared that a dragon with eyes like ember was coming to burn their woodland home. His tribe, accustomed to his pranks, laughed. Kong protested. He had seen smoke on the horizon, heard the stamp of boots. No one listened. Realizing that he had fooled them one too many times, Kong watched as they ignored his warning. Soon, columns of foreign soldiers, Noxians, marched through the forest, accompanied by machinery that belched smoke and fire. Trees fell, and the air filled with the cries of disturbed spirits. By the time the Shimon understood the threat, it was too late to defend their home. They fled, carrying with them whatever they could. As they ran, they named Kong outcast, blaming his tricks for their unpreparedness. Kong, heartbroken, left. Alone in the forest, Kong survived by wit and guile. He introduced himself to strangers with bravado. He told anyone who would listen that he was the Monkey King, undefeated in duels and in games of cunning. He challenged mortals at taverns and won through trickery. He claimed trophies and sang songs of his own victories. He believed his stories even when they were untrue because they gave him identity. This charlatan life protected him from the pain of exile. He smiled wide to hide his loneliness. His path changed when he met a Noxian soldier in the hinterlands of Xun. Kong boasted that no human could defeat him. The soldier, amused, accepted the challenge. Kong found himself overpowered. The Noxian and his comrades chased him deep into the wilderness. Kong hid among branches and vines, trembling as he listened to foreign voices trample his homeland. It was there, shivering and alone, that he saw the extent of the devastation Noxus had wrought. Trees burned, animals fled, and the river ran dark with ash. Rage built within him, not only at the soldiers but at himself for his earlier deceit. Determined to grow strong, Kong sought out legends. He heard of a village where the masters of Wuju martial arts had lived. He traveled there, hoping to learn. All he found were ruins. He called out, but only his echo answered. Then he saw a man sitting quietly among the destruction, a blade resting across his lap. Kong challenged the man, expecting an easy victory. In a single motion, the man struck him down and resumed his meditation. Kong returned the next day, and the day after, and the day after that. Each time he attacked from different angles. Each time the man anticipated him. Frustrated but intrigued, Kong begged the man to teach him. The man was Yi, the last master of Wuju. He had stayed behind to atone, blaming himself for the death of his fellow disciples when they had gone to defend Ionia. Yi saw in Kong not just recklessness, but humility. Beneath the bravado was a desire to protect. Yi agreed to train him. Under Yi's guidance, Kong learned to channel his impulsiveness. He trained his body with exercises that honed his speed and strength. He trained his mind through meditation, learning patience and awareness. Yi taught him that the blade is not merely swung, but guided by intention. He taught him that sometimes a joke can disarm an opponent, and sometimes it can mask fear. Kong was not an easy student. He chafed at discipline. He would prank Yi during training, tying his shoelaces together or hiding his tea. Yi, unamused but persistent, countered with lessons that turned Kong's tricks back on him. When Kong attempted to fight through a field of smoke poppies, hoping their bursts of pollen would hide him, Yi moved calmly through the flowers, striking only when necessary. These lessons taught Kong that cleverness without wisdom is noise. Slowly, he grew. He learned to anticipate, to listen, to respect. Finally, Yi told Kong the story of why he had remained among ruins. He and his disciples had tried to stop Noxians. In doing so, they had drawn destruction upon themselves. Yi carried that guilt. Kong realized that he, too, wanted redemption. He wanted to defend the Shimon, to prove that he was more than a prankster. Yi, recognizing Kong's transformation, gave him a gift, an enchanted staff crafted by the legendary weaponsmith Doran. This staff could extend, spin, and strike with incredible force. Yi also gave him a new name, Wukong. With this name, Kong left his life of deception behind. As Wukong, he now roamed the first lands with purpose. He stood beside Master Yi, confronting injustice. They defended villages from brigands who claimed to collect taxes. They stopped soldiers who sought to enslave or destroy. Wukong's playful spirit remained. He laughed and told stories, but beneath the humor was a firm resolve. He learned that balance could be protected through both wit and strength. When he returned to Shimon lands, some of his tribe welcomed him, others still distrusted him. He did not let their judgment dampen his spirit. He continued his climb toward wisdom, understanding that redemption is not a single act, but a lifetime of choices. On a remote island, far to the east of any map known to most, the last members of an ancient Vastayan tribe lived in peace. They called themselves the Uvi Cat. They believed they were direct descendants of the Vastayashai'rei and kept their traditions pure. Their shoma flowed like water between them. Thoughts and feelings were shared with ease. Their homes were woven from vines and flowers that glowed softly with magic, forming living walls that let in the breeze. Their days were filled with games and songs. Among them was Nico, a young and curious soul with eyes that reflected the shifting colors of the sea. She was energetic and resilient, always eager to explore. She loved hiding small treasures to see if others could find them. She loved taking on the forms of birds and fish, feeling the joy of flight and the cool rush of water. Her elders smiled at her enthusiasm, sensing that her spirit was particularly bright. Life on the island was idyllic, but the Uvi Cat knew that beyond the horizon, the world was changing. One day, a great calamity threatened them. The earth trembled and dark clouds gathered over the sea. The elders felt a disturbance in the spirit realm. They gathered the tribe and spoke of sacrifice. A rift had opened, and if they did not act, their island, and perhaps all worlds, would be consumed by darkness. They chose to stay and hold back the tide, using their combined magic to seal the breach. They told Nico to run. Nico did not want to leave, but they insisted. They gave her a small, carved idol filled with their shoma and told her to remember their songs. Taking on the form of a bird, she flew across the sea as the island behind her crumbled. She felt the pain of her people as if it were her own. Their voices echoed in her heart, urging her to survive. Exhausted, she fell into the ocean. She clung to driftwood until she saw a structure on the horizon, a ship. She swam to it and hid among the barrels. The ship carried her to Haralport, a bustling city unlike anything she had known. In Haralport, Nico was overwhelmed. The city was full of people of every shape and size, speaking languages she did not understand. Buildings loomed and carts rattled over cobblestones. She felt waves of emotion everywhere, anxiety, joy, anger, all mixing like a storm. She tried to communicate using her shoma, mimicking the faces of those she met, but most did not understand. One Vastayan sailor named Crete approached her, asking which tribe she belonged to. She reached out with her shoma to show him her form, mimicking his features to show peace. Crete recoiled, unfamiliar with such intimacy. His negative reaction stung, and Nico fled into the crowd, shifting forms to hide. Alone, Nico found solace in the jungle beyond the city. There she encountered sleek jungle cats. She took on their form and ran with them, feeling the joy of muscles stretching and claws gripping bark. Their leader, a strong, dark-haired woman, confronted her. Nico shifted back to her own form, and the woman revealed herself to be Nidalee, a huntress who could also transform. Intrigued, Nico sensed a kinship. Though Nidalee was not Uvi Cat, she shared a connection to wild magic. They traveled together for months, hunting, laughing, and exchanging stories. Nidalee taught Nico how to survive in unfamiliar lands, how to recognize poisonous plants, how to respect the spirits of new places. In turn, Nico shared Uvi Cat songs and the joy of shared shoma. Dreams began to call Nico to the towns and cities. She saw visions of dead trees reaching for light, of people gathered around them, of magic flowing through places where it had been suppressed. She felt her ancestors urging her to bring color to a world grown gray. Though the wilderness was safe, her purpose lay elsewhere. She asked Nidalee to join her, but Nidalee had her own path. They embraced, their shoma mingling in gratitude, and then Nico set out alone. In every place she traveled, she saw both beauty and sorrow. She marveled at human artistry, tapestries woven with intricate patterns, songs sung in taverns that told of long journeys. She was also saddened by cruelty, cages filled with animals, spirits ignored or mocked, Vastaya treated as curiosities. Nico could not stay silent. When she saw injustice, she intervened. She would mimic a captor freeing those in chains. She would mimic a soldier to lead oppressors away from their victims. She rarely used violence. Her power lay in misdirection and empathy. Through her travels, Nico dreamed of forming a new tribe, one not defined by birth, but by shared values. She imagined a community where Vastaya, humans, yordles, and others could coexist, where shoma flowed freely, where stories and thoughts were shared without fear. She carried with her the carved idol filled with her people's shoma, listening to the voices inside. They encouraged her to love, to trust, to remain curious. She met countless individuals, each leaving an impression. A child shared a fruit with her. An old man told her a story of a bird who sang at dawn and was rewarded with a sunrise. A spirit led her to a hidden spring when she was thirsty. Each encounter wove into her vision. Nico's story is one of survival and creation. She lost her home but not her culture. She carries the Uvi cat within her and honors them with every act of kindness. She knows the world can be harsh, but she chooses to see its potential for beauty. Her ability to mimic reflects her belief that understanding others brings connection. When she changes form, she does not mock but empathizes. She continues to travel, seeking those who will join her new tribe. To know Nico, people say, is to love Nico, because she embodies the innocent hope that life, even after great loss, can grow vibrant again. In the vast deserts of Shurima, where the sun scorches the sand and the wind carries the scent of adventure and danger, lived a tribe of Vastaya known as the Kiilash. They believed that honor was found in the hunt and that glory belonged to those who could bring down the greatest beasts. They wore the teeth and claws of their quarry as badges of pride. Among them, a runt was born. He was small, his fur thin, his voice weak. His father, Ponyaf, was the chieftain and saw in his offspring not a son, but a disappointment. He ignored the child, assuming that the harsh desert would claim him. The runt, named Rengar, refused to die. Hungry and ignored, he scavenged grubs and roots. He watched other hunters, mimicking their movements in secret. He learned how to move silently in the sand, how to read tracks, and how to sense changes in the wind that signaled the approach of prey or predator. He understood early that he could not rely on strength, so he honed his mind and reflexes. Each day he woke with determination. Each night he slept under the stars, dreaming of greatness. One day, Rengar stumbled upon a group of human hunters led by a legendary marksman named Markon. Markon saw the scrappy young Vastayan following his trail. Instead of killing him, Markon tossed him a blade and kicked him down into a ravine. "If you wish to be a hunter," Markon said, "make your first kill." Markon expected the runt to die. Instead, Rengar crawled through thorns and rocks, faced with the task of killing something larger than himself. He could have given up. He did not. He stabbed a small animal, ending its life with trembling hands. The rush he felt was not joy, but survival. He returned to the surface, eyes blazing. Markon laughed and left. He thought no more of the Kiilash runt. But Rengar followed Markon from afar. He watched how the hunter stalked beasts, how he used the wind to carry his scent away, how he aimed with patience. Rengar scavenged the remains of Markon's kills, living off scraps. In Markon's shadow, he learned to hunt. Markon, eventually annoyed by this persistent follower, turned on him. He told Rengar to stop trailing him. He placed a knife to Rengar's throat and said that the only way to be a hunter was to hunt. Then he kicked Rengar down another ravine. It was a cruel lesson, but it forged something within the young Vastaya. Rengar left Markon's shadow and ventured into the desert alone. He pushed himself to the edge of exhaustion, hunting creatures far larger than himself. He polished a sandhawk's skull until it shone and braided shrieker teeth into his hair. Each trophy was proof not only to others, but to himself that he was not weak. After months and years of honing his skills, he he returned to his tribe. He expected acceptance. Ponjaf looked at Rengar's trophies and scoffed. They were impressive, but not enough. The chieftain declared that only by bringing back the head of a legendary void creature, a beast known as Kha'Zix, would Rengar be welcomed back. Eager to prove himself, Rengar sought the creature. He tracked it through the dunes, his heart pounding. But when he found it, the creature was more cunning than he anticipated. It struck from the shadows, ripping one of Rengar's eyes from its socket. Blood blurred his vision. In pain and rage, he struck wildly. Kha'Zix escaped. Rengar returned home, humiliated and scarred, admitting his failure. Ponjaf chastised him. As Ponjaf spoke, Rengar noticed that the trophies in his father's hut were coated with dust. Ponjaf had not hunted anything formidable in years. He had sent Rengar after Kha'Zix because he feared the beast. Something snapped within Rengar. He interrupted Ponjaf and called him a coward. He declared that his scars were proof of his will to survive, whereas Ponjaf's hands were clean because he had not hunted. In a moment of fury, Rengar leapt upon his father and gutted him. The tribe watched in silence. When Ponjaf's body fell, the fiercest hunters crowned Rengar with flame roses, marking him as their new chieftain. Rengar did not revel in their acceptance. He did not need their praise. He needed only the thrill of the hunt. He left the village without ceremony. He did not take a trophy from his father, for he deemed his father unworthy. He set his sights on Kha'Zix again. The hunt became personal. It was no longer about proving himself to others, but about satisfying his own need. He scoured Shurima and beyond, following rumors of a void creature with blades, like scythes. He visited ancient temples where scholars spoke of void-touched horrors. He traversed jungles where no human dared to step. He honed his senses further, learning to smell the taint of the void on the breeze. Stories of Rengar spread. Travelers whispered of a one-eyed hunter with a mane braided with trophies, whose laugh echoed across dunes. They said he could track anything. They said he was relentless. Rengar encountered other Vastaya in his travels. Some sought to join him, hoping to share in his glory. He turned them away. He had become solitary, his focus absolute. Yet, when he came upon those in danger, particularly those oppressed by beings like the Void, he aided them. He had no interest in cruelty for its own sake. Rengar's story is not one of redemption, but of pursuit. He continues to track Kha'Zix, knowing that one day one of them will fall. In the meantime, he hunts. The desert remains his teacher and his test. The Kiilash whisper his name with both pride and fear, knowing that he embodies their ideals taken to extremes. Other Vastaya see in him a warning. That obsession can consume. That pride can lead to isolation. Yet they also see a force of nature, a being who will not allow the terrors of the void to roam unchecked. Rengar listens only to the wind and the beat of his own heart as he races across sand and stone, eyes fixed on distant tracks that glimmer like mirages. Off the coast of Mount Targon, deep beneath the waves, thrived a tribe of Vastaya known as the Marai. They were mermaid-like, with sleek bodies built for swimming, fins that caught the currents, and eyes attuned to the dim light of the deep. They lived in coral structures that glowed with bioluminescent algae, creating an underwater city of shifting color and shadow. They told stories with movements of their hands and tails, their voices echoing through water like the songs of whales. The Marais had discovered long ago a rift in the depths. From that rift flowed a creeping darkness, a chill that could extinguish life. They found that a moonstone, a glowing rock infused with celestial magic, could repel the creatures that emerged from the abyss. The moonstone's light bathed their village in safety, but it dimmed over time. Every 100 years, when its glow began to fade, a ritual commenced. The tribe chose a tide caller, a warrior who would dive into the rift to retrieve an abyssal pearl. This pearl would then be exchanged with a land walker tribe in a ceremony that brought a new moonstone down from the mountain. The ritual was a pact between sea and land, a reminder that the fate of all beings was entwined. Nami was born into this world with eyes that gleamed like the ocean at dawn. She was stubborn, bold, and inquisitive. From a young age, she swam further than others dared, exploring caves, chasing fish, and studying the play of light in the water. She trained with a staff carved from coral and imbued with magic. She dreamed of being the tide caller, though elders shook their heads. She was impulsive, they said. The tide caller must be prudent. Nami's mother, a crafter of beautiful shells, told her to be patient. Nami nodded, but inside she burned with determination. When the moonstone dimmed sooner than expected, the tribe hurried to choose a tide caller. Tradition suggested Rasho, a calm and level-headed warrior. Nami was disappointed, but watched with respect as Rasho accepted the staff and plunged into the rift. Days turned into weeks. The Mare sang songs of courage and lit luminescent lanterns to guide him back. He did not return. Fear crept through the water like a cold current. Elders argued. The moonstone's light grew fainter. Someone had to act. Nami decided that if no one else would, she would. She took her mother's Bathi staff, a tool used to measure the depths, and swam into the rift. Darkness closed around her. Strange shapes moved in the water. She clutched the staff and pushed on. Horrors whispered at the edge of her vision. She sang to herself, remembering her mother's lullabies and the songs of the Mare. She found the abyssal pearl glowing like a promise. She seized it and swam up. In her hand was also the fallen tide caller's staff. When she broke the surface, the ocean was still. She was alone. Nami rode the tide to shore. According to tradition, a luminous wanderer from Mount Targon would meet her and trade the pearl for a new moonstone. Instead, an elderly woman stood alone on the beach. She told Nami that no moonstone had come. The aspect of the moon, the being who could conjure the stone, had left Targon. The pact was broken. Nami felt anger and fear. The lives of her people depended on that stone. She realized that she would have to venture onto land to seek the aspect. The sea could not remain isolated. Armed with the tide caller staff, Nami summoned a pool of moving water beneath her fins and stood. She felt the earth beneath her for the first time. It was solid and strange. She inhaled air with lungs and felt it burning in a new way. Her determination was greater than her discomfort. She would find the aspect. She would save her tribe. She walked toward the mountains, hearing the distant crash of waves behind her. On land, Nami discovered a world unlike hers. Trees reached up like coral towers. Birds flew like fish, flitting through currents of wind. People stared, some pointed. A few laughed at her awkward steps. Others whispered of legends come to life. Nami struggled but persevered. She met humans who helped her, offering guidance and food in exchange for stories of the sea. She met Vastaya, who had never imagined returning to the water. She learned that prejudice and kindness existed side by side. At night, she lay in pools she conjured with her staff, listening to the sea's voice in her dreams. She travelled toward Mount Targon, the peak that touched the stars. Along the way, she fought off creatures attracted by the smell of the abyssal pearl. She encountered spirits of rivers who sympathized with her mission and lent her currents when she needed speed. She climbed cliffs, her tail replaced by legs through magic, feeling her muscles strain in unfamiliar ways. Each step was a reminder of her love for the Marai and her willingness to endure discomfort for their sake. When she finally found the aspect of the moon, she discovered that the being had fled not out of malice, but confusion and fear, overwhelmed by the demands placed upon her. Nami spoke from her heart, telling the aspect of the Marai's plight, of the bond between sea and land, of promises kept for centuries. The aspect listened and, moved by Nami's determination, agreed to return. Together they conjured a new moonstone. Nami returned to the sea, carrying the stone like a heart. The Marai rejoiced. They honored her not only for her bravery but for her willingness to bridge worlds. She became the Tide Caller, not by the choice of elders, but by the act of stepping into the unknown. She remains vigilant, diving into depths to renew the stone when needed, venturing onto land when the bond between sea and sky wavers. Her story teaches that courage is sometimes found in leaving home, that promises bind across time and space, and that the harmony of the world depends on those willing to act when tradition falls short. As ages turned and the tales of heroes and wanderers became part of the fabric of the first lands, the world changed. Where once there was mostly wilderness punctuated by small villages, there were now cities and roads. Where magic had flowed freely, there were now devices that redirected, harnessed, or stifled it. Yet time moved slowly in rhythms older than stone, and the Vastaya felt the change like a long exhale. The Noxian invasion was a wound that had not fully healed. Soldiers had come with iron and fire, aiming to claim Ionia's rich land and magic. They had been pushed back, but scars remained. Families had been broken, and sacred sites had been desecrated. In the wake of the invasion, many Ionians grew wary, their spirits hardened. Some turned their attention to defense, developing martial disciplines and magical wards. Others turned inward, seeking to rebuild without interference. This new caution sometimes spilled over into aggression. The Vastaya saw not only foreign threats, but the anger of the land's own people. Humans continued to explore and experiment with magic, often without understanding its subtleties. In some regions, wealthy families commissioned scholars to build machines that could siphon ambient magic. These machines, named Quinlons or by other regional terms, allowed mortals to channel power in ways that seemed miraculous to those who had never felt the raw currents. To the Vastaya, these devices were like dams on a river. They disrupted the flow, causing drought downstream and floods where they malfunctioned. Tribes debated how to respond. Some sought to destroy the devices outright. Others attempted to educate humans, explaining that balance could be maintained if magic were approached with respect. Still others retreated, choosing to protect their enclaves rather than engage in conflict. In cities like Haralport and Vlonko, Vastaya walked the streets in greater numbers than before. They donned cloaks to conceal their features, wary of judgment. Some found acceptance and work, musicians performing in taverns, healers offering remedies that combined natural and magical cures, craftsmen selling woven art. Others faced discrimination. Signs appeared on doors forbidding entry to anyone not human. Rumors spread of Vastaya stealing children, of spirits cursing those who house them. Fear, when fed, grows. Even so, bonds formed. A human child befriended a Vastayan storyteller and learned of the Titan War, carrying those lessons into adulthood. An aging Vastayan took up residence near a mortal temple, teaching young priests how to hear the quiet voices of trees. In times of need, Vastaya and humans stood together. When a plague threatened a coastal village, a Mare healer ventured ashore, bringing herbs from the depths. When rogue spirits stirred up storms, human shamans and Vastayan shamans joined voices to calm them. These acts of solidarity were not always recorded in chronicles, but they rippled through communities, building trust. Among the Vastaya themselves, conversations turned to the future. Elders worried that no new Vastaya were being born in some tribes. They feared that the thinning of magic and the encroachment of mortals signaled an approaching end. Younger Vastaya pushed for new ways. They proposed alliances, innovations, and even migrations. Some suggested that perhaps their salvation lay in forming new tribes that blended lineages, thereby strengthening their Shoma. Others wished to seek out the few remaining Vastayashai'rei deep within the spirit realm and ask for guidance. Songs once sung of past glories now began to include hopes for future harmony. The present era of Runeterra is thus one of tension and possibility. Wild magic has not disappeared. It still flows, though in some places it is forced underground. Spirits still dance, though they are more cautious. The Vastaya still sing, though their voices sometimes catch in their throats. Human curiosity continues to push boundaries, sometimes with care, sometimes with disregard. The intersection of these paths is where the story of the world unfolds. Modern champions like Ahri, Xayah, Rakan, Wukong, Nico, Rengar, Nami, and countless unnamed others illustrate the complexity of this era. They carry personal histories that intertwine with collective fate. They embody the tensions between revenge and forgiveness, between tradition and innovation, between pride and humility. Through their deeds, they show that the future is not predetermined. The choices made each day by individuals, whether humble or renowned, shape the currents of magic and the tenor of the tales yet to be told. And so, sleepy summoner, we return to the quiet from which we began. Our story has traveled from the dawn of the first lands, through wars and wanderings, into the hearts of individuals and the slow turning of ages. It has shown us that harmony is neither a destination nor a stagnant peace. It is a living balance, maintained by respect, by courage, by curiosity, and by love. The Vastaya and the Vastayashai'rei are not relics of a bygone era. They are living threads in the tapestry of Runeterra. Their forms may differ, fur, scales, feathers, fins, but their essence speaks of unity between realms. They remind us that humans are not alone on this world, that spirits are not mere myths, and that the land itself breathes and dreams. They remind us that when fear threatens to divide us, stories and songs can mend. Somewhere, as you listen, a nine-tailed wanderer whispers a blessing over a sleeping child. Somewhere, a rebel pair dances beneath the moon, planning their next act of defiance with laughter and resolve. A trickster in a monkey's guise rests beneath a tree, contemplating his next lesson and the weight of his staff. A chameleon girl watches faces in a crowd, seeing possibilities for friendship where others see only difference. A one-eyed hunter track shadows across sand, his heart beating with the rhythm of pursuit. A mermaid stands on a shore, moonstone in hand, listening to the crash of waves and the murmur of stars. These images are not separate, but interwoven. They are part of the same song. It is a song that invites you to listen to the world around you with new ears, to see with new eyes, to feel with a heart open to both sorrow and joy. It is a song that asks you to remember that you too are a thread in the tapestry, connected to those who came before and to those who will come after. Close your eyes now. Hear the rustle of leaves, the whisper of water, the murmur of distant voices. Remember that the story continues, carried on the breath of the world itself. Let that breath lull you into peaceful dreams, knowing that while the world may change, the promise of harmony endures, so long as there are those willing to listen, to act, and to love.